We're back with one of the most closely fought leagues in Europe. Yes, it's Le Championnat in France. And Andy, it's a ridiculous story, Montpellier winning the title. One thing I want to get from you is, and we were talking about this before, is what would some equivalents to Montpellier be in other leagues? You know, when we came up with, you know, maybe we'd be talking perhaps an Udinese or a Granada or something of that ilk. But what I want to get from you is, could this only have happened in France in terms of the top European leagues, a team like that winning the title?
I think it could maybe have only happened this season in France even. I think you've got a point where the PSG project hasn't really taken hold. They have got a lot of good players, of course, but they're very, very bitty this season. And I think it would have been the worst slight on the French game if PSG had somehow managed to eke out that title, because it would have been through moments of individual quality rather than anything else. You know, Lille went to the Parc des Princes when it was full up and they played PSG off the pitch. Montpellier did the same. They had 60-65% possession. But, you know, it is an incredible achievement because this is a team that's got the 14th biggest budget out of 20 in Ligue 1. If you look at Lyon, for example, who are underachieving, who finished 4th this season and won the Cup, they've got a budget that's 8 times the size of Montpellier. So it's absolutely extraordinary. But it's money in the bank from what they've done in bringing through youth players. And of course this is an important thing for lots of French clubs, of course, you know, even Rennes, Lyon, they bring through a lot of players. But the fact they've managed to do that because when they were taking root in the French First Division a couple of years ago, they wanted to mix those youth products with a couple of experienced players who've been around the block. They've kept that, and those players, even if they're not in the team anymore, the likes of Geoffroy Denis, Cyril Jeanchamp, they're around the squad, and the younger players have had the confidence to take it on, the likes of Giroud and Belhanda, and take their central role.
Raf, that's all fine and good, but bottom line is last night, were it not for a man named John Utaka, he a former Portsmouth, and I think went to Saudi Arabia, went all around the world. Were it not for his 2 goals, we'd be talking about Paris Saint-Germain and Carlo Ancelotti right now.
Yeah.
Does it say something that this was also the season that, you know, or is it Montpellier being good, or is it clubs like Lyon, like Marseille, like Bordeaux? Because it's easy to pick on Paris Saint-Germain, but at least they came within range of Montpellier. These other clubs stunk it up all season long, and they also have huge budgets relative to Montpellier.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, all the giants, the big boys, just didn't turn up, and it was still a surprise that one of the smallest actually took advantage, rather than sort of a perhaps slightly more mid-table team. I mean, this is a team, as you know, that were in the 2nd division 3 years ago. So I'm struggling to come up with any analogy that would actually fit. I mean, we might have to say something like Blackpool. I don't know. It's just bizarre.
Kaiserslautern did something like that in Germany, I think, many years ago, right?
It's true, but they were a genuine title-winning side, which had a very off year, went down, then went up again with the same players and won it. So even that was a bit of a strange story. But I mean, it's just amazing because you can see that the sort of the thing about football that you saw in a Champions League final over one game can actually, on very few occasions, be replicated over the whole season. That the underdog really has its day. But that kind of league in France is enough to sort of keep you interested for another 10, 20 years, because it's such an amazing story that can only happen, I think, as far as professional sports is concerned, in football. You cannot imagine basketball or you know, American football, this kind of stuff, the differences being level to the extent that a team like Montpellier can win. That's amazing.
But there's quality there too. I mean, you can't just say they're the plucky underdog, even if it is an extraordinary story in budgetary terms. The quality really is there. They completed more dribbles than any other team in the league. They had more shots. They were the top scorers. So this all means something. You know, they haven't gone to tough it out.
You're going all statistical on there, and of course, I think the obvious question going forward is, certainly 2 of the most talked about stars that they had, certainly not the only ones, Olivier Giroud and Younes Belhanda. They're not going to be there next season. Or will they stick around for Champions League football a la Eden Hazard at Lille?
they could. Belander has said it would make no sense really for this to be the club that I came through the youth system with, and me not play Champions League football for them. Giroud's perhaps a different story. We'll have to see about that, because they're
he's a bit older. He's from Grenoble.
That's right. He was a bit of a late developer. But Belander's only just moved really to that orthodox number 10 position. He was a defensive midfielder before that. He knows he's still learning the game, and he knows Girard, the coach, is the man who can teach him that, because of course he was with the French national team before as assistant. Then he was under 21s coach. He is a great guy to bring young players through.
A lot of people thought that Lille, it's sort of the curse of French football. Lille, they do well, they win the title, and then boom, they lose Yohan Cabaye, they lose Gervinho, they lose Moussa Sow, they lose Adil Rami, and yet they still had another very strong year in finishing third, and at times really pushing Paris Saint-Germain and Montpellier. Is this a testament to Rudy Garcia, or is it a well-run club? Or is it Joe Cole?
Well, I think it's both of those first two, certainly. I think the third one, actually, Joe Cole had a very good first 2/3 of the season. But what his impact really did, again, it's not something entirely on the playing side. He raised the aspirations of the squad. And I think the relationship that he created with Eden Hazard was an extraordinary one. He increased his expectations. And really, you could say Lille were a lot weaker in a lot of ways. Physically, they were a bit short. They didn't close out some games they should have done. They conceded a lot of points in the last 5 minutes, whereas Montpellier won a lot of points in the last 5 minutes. But Hazard really carried the team for the last 3 months of the season. He scored 20 goals, he created another 15. He became that central figure, and he expected things to be expected of him.
We certainly don't expect Hazard to be back next season.
No, he won't be.
What worries me a little bit is, why is he going out there playing silly buggers? First he says, I'll be playing at Manchester next season, but not saying if it's going to be the blue half or the red half. And at some point he said, no, I'll be playing in blue. And then now this last thing, this interest from Chelsea flatters me. Is this in line with his personality? Because I thought he was a pretty solid guy. Instead, he seems like he's gone all loopy.
This is a mark of extraordinary self-confidence, I think. He's just incredibly frank. I think the one deviation to that really is this change at the last minute, that he said he would announce where he was going, consistent with what he'd said all along, after the last game of the season. I think the fact that he has expected the sort of wages that someone who's the finished article would get, whereas potential suitors want to pay him the wages of someone who's a good player who could become a great player. And Chelsea have come out of left field and maybe be prepared to pay him what he really wants to get. I think that is the subtext that's lingering in the background.
Now, Paris Saint-Germain, of course, so much hype with Qataris coming in. They spent a tremendous amount of money. Raf, they changed their manager in mid-season in what was really not a very well-constructed team. They got in a warrior of the light like Carlo Ancelotti, but ultimately they stumbled at the end. Are they going to be back stronger next season?
Yeah, I mean, there is no suggestion that they shouldn't be. We've seen it many times before, a team that sort of gets pumped up and is almost like on steroids from one season to the next. It doesn't automatically then win the title straight away. It took Chelsea a year, it took Man City a couple of years, and I think PSG would have to fall in that similar category. I think in Ancelotti, to have a guy who can manage that transition very well. I think he's almost a perfect manager. It's not a project in the sense of building everything from the grassroots level, but actually the other way around, sort of going from the top down. And I think that's what he's very good at from his experience at Milan and at Chelsea. And I think he will get it right eventually if they allow him to strengthen again. And the indications are that he will be. So I think that you have to, for me, unless they get it horribly wrong in the transfer market, for me, they're already now the huge favourites to win it next year.
Andy, one of the keys that can often happen, one of the things that often happen, we've seen it with Manchester City, we've seen it with other clubs, is that there was a whole bunch of relatively high-priced players there before, in Erdink and Nene and whatever else. They brought in more. Now they're going to bring in still more guys. They could find themselves in a situation where they're stuck with all these players who make too much money that they can't loan them out to other teams and they can't sell them. Can Leonardo navigate that? I mean, what do you do with like a Diego Lugano at this stage? Are you really going to say, "Ooh, Lugano and Alex are my center halves"? No, you presume that they'll fit a Sacco in there, whatever. It's going to be difficult, right?
Yeah, and he's been shown a certain degree of impatience, Lugano. I think that's a very good example of what's wrong. They've still got plenty of chaff that they can get rid of. But what I think is the problem for them is because the French league is a profile lower than the Premier League, Spain, Germany. They've got to really...
And Italy.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
They've really got to do something quite drastic to convince players that they've got to come in. Like the timing of Ancelotti coming in was all wrong. They should have kept Combarare towards the end of the season, toughed it out, even if they weren't playing great football. But they need to have great players straight away and big names straight away if they're going to convince other big names to come and be taken seriously.
Yeah, I expect Ancelotti would agree with you that he would have much rather come in at the end of the season. That wraps up France, but don't worry, we've got so much to get through. We've got we've got a bit of the old Italy and the old Bundesliga coming up in a bit. But first, España. Stay with us. And we're back, and we're going to head over and do a little bit of La Liga. Now, obviously this season, Barcelona and Real Madrid, the head-to-head for me, team number 1 and 1A. But Spain served up a whole variety of interesting storylines, I think, beyond the big two. You guys are with me on that, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was interesting hearing Tim Stannard refer to the race for the Champions League place, the fourth Champions League place is not really a race the other week. It was like a series of bold men fighting over a comb, really. And, you always look at the gap between Real Madrid and Barcelona and the rest, and you say, well, you look at what Athletic did to Manchester United in Europe, and it's not a slight on the quality of the league. But the points tallies tell you something different, and you wonder if domestically Real Madrid and Barcelona just broke the spirit of the rest, really. And I think Valencia falling to bits in the last couple of months of the season shows the same thing.
Raf, it's that age-old dilemma, right? So Real Madrid, they reach 100 points, and they break the record of points in a league which was set many, many years ago. No, it wasn't. 2009-10 season by Barcelona when they got 99. So when the record is broken twice in the last 3 years, your temptation is to say, look, the league is all rubbish except for these two teams. But then that's offset by the counter-argument, by the performance of these teams in the Europa League, Athletic Bilbao, Atletico Madrid, Valencia reaching the semi-final. Am I right when I say that actually these two are two of the greatest teams ever and far and away the two best teams in the world?
I don't know if you can call the Real Madrid team one of the best teams ever yet, because they haven't done it consistently enough. I mean, they've now come back after 3 barren spells to win the title. They haven't done it in Europe yet. I think it's a long...
3 barren spells. We're talking about this team now, not the team from 3 years ago.
No, but if you want to call them the best team of Europe after their first time.
This season's Real Madrid.
Well, you said best ever.
Is this season's Real Madrid the
best ever team? No.
Or among the best ever teams?
No.
How can you historically evaluate something that's still current? I just don't see that.
How is it still current? The season's over.
The team's still current. The team will be pretty much the same next season.
Right. Well,
give or take a player.
They might be looked upon as one of the best ever. We'll have to see. But it's very difficult because, as you said, you look at the Europa League and you think, wow, these teams are really fantastic. But then they can't consistently perform on that level and get beaten by the Almerias of the league. And it's strange because I think there is something quite intrinsic to Spanish teams and to the Spanish league, where people who are in the betting industry will tell you it's very difficult to predict some of these games because the teams very often don't reach their potential. You have really good teams like Bilbao, like Atletico Madrid, but then the other team scores first and they completely fall apart. I think there must be something in the psychology of these teams that they don't seem to be as predictable. They don't, as a league, collectively, sort of reach their potential the way that, for example, German and English teams do, where it's much more predictable. Usually, before the season, you say, okay, this is the third best team, and unless something goes horribly wrong, they'll finish as the third best team. And I think the Spanish league is a lot more prone to mood swings, below Real Madrid and Barcelona, of course. And
possibly below Valencia as well, since I think most of us had them as the third best team, and they did duly finish third. you mentioned Bilbao there, and I think a lot of neutrals became suddenly big Marcelo Bielsa fans, and it struck me that the reason Bilbao are a mid-table team is that the way he plays is simply so taxing on the players that they can't play on that level. It's almost reminiscent shades of Arrigo Sacchi when they had this great team that couldn't win the league, except for the first season, of course. Do you think when we look at Bielsa, we kind of overrate him a little bit because it is such a great story, and ultimately the mark of a great manager should be somebody who can produce consistent results with a team?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to love the football, and it's hard not to love the fact that he goes his own way, the press conference he gives, the fact that he's, his personality focuses on a neutral point.
Ian Holloway also
every time
gives
he
great
speaks.
press conferences.
But
right?
yeah,
he's not spoken of.
It's in the football as well. But as you say, I think it is being used to it as well. Because of course, if we go back to the start of the season, there is a bit of revisionism with Bielsa because we like to watch his teams when they're playing well so much that for the first 2 or 3 months of the season, the players who are all home based, of course, they thought, what's going on here? They didn't understand him. They didn't understand what he wanted in terms of his methods of working or anything like that. So I think it's unreasonable to expect them to get to the end of the season in the same physical condition that they were at the start of it. And I think maybe that's something, especially when they're in 2 cups still as well.
So by that logic, that they should be much better next season.
I think we all love the idea of Bielsa, but the reality of Bielsa and his teams isn't quite always that compelling, and that's the problem.
Well, we're joined now by Tim Stannard, who of course blogs at La Liga Loca. Definitely worth bookmarking, in my opinion. Tim, thanks for joining us. Isn't it funny? We're not talking about Real Madrid and Barcelona. We're talking about Bielsa here. But I want to get your take on this quickly. The point that perhaps Andy made is that Bielsa suffered, or Athletic Bilbao suffered a bit this season because they were still getting used to Bielsa's methods, which suggests he might come good next season. Whereas my view is that perhaps this is kind of all there is, in the sense that his football is so taxing that they really can't play to a consistent level. And that's why they end up in mid-table. Who's right?
Everyone's right. I think Athletic Bilbao, those methods would have worked had they just had a bigger squad. But intrinsically, they can't have a bigger squad because the nature of the club is to pick from a very, very small pool of players. So if you had a very strong 24-man squad, then that would be fine. But their squad is 15, 16. If you look at who comes on as the only other striking alternative, perhaps, to Fernando Llorente, is Toquero, and he's a second division rated player, but because he happens to come from the region, he's got an opportunity. He only scored 1 league goal, but he works very, very hard. So I think with more players, then they might have really pushed on to the Champions League, but by the end they were completely drained and very, very little resources. So the methods work, but the Athletic Bilbao system, their philosophy doesn't.
Now, I know you want to talk to us about Levante. It's been a tremendous story this season. I have my own love for Levante simply because of that wonderful YouTube clip. And when this is over, I urge everybody to go out there. The wonderful clip of Ballesteros going and handing Cristiano Ronaldo his rear end to him in a sprint. I don't know if you guys have seen this, Andy, Raf, but it is fantastic. Is it voodoo that Levante do so? Because it's got to be voodoo that, Ballesteros, who's about as big and heavy as a large refrigerator, can outrun Cristiano, right?
He gets a little bit offended if you say that, because he actually says, you know what, I may be a bit old now, but I've never been a slow defender. So he's always had a bit of pace, he said, when he needs it over 20 or so meters. Last week for the 4-4-2, you can keep a lookout on the interview for that. I spoke to Luis Garcia, who's the current Getafe manager, but he's also behind the Levante story, you could say. He left them last summer. And he said it's not just a one-off this year. It's been a 4-year process. The first year was stabilisation in the second division when they nearly went bankrupt. So they had a fair amount of mental strength there. Then they went up. Then they had that remarkable season last year where they were dead and buried in January, and they went on to stay up. So this year is these players building on a team spirit, building on a very, very effective way of playing, and it's got them into 6th. They've benefited certainly from Sevilla being a waste of space this year. Atletico maybe coming in at the end Villarreal being a disaster, Athletic Bilbao being caught up with Europa League. They've taken advantage of this, certainly 3 or 4 big teams out there, but they deserve their 6th spot because they were in the top 4 for pretty much all the campaign. And they deserve it. A very effective way of playing. A striker, Kone, who got them 16, 17 goals in the league, and defensively very strong and very well organised, and a fantastic team spirit that's been fighting for 4 years now.
Tim, do you buy this? Because I kind of struggle to think that somebody 4 years ago and says, oh yes, this will be my plan. Kone, who I think has scored, like 1 goal in the last 3 years before this season, he's going to go and he's going to score 16 goals 3 years from now. And see all these old guys, it's not just Ballesteros, like, oh, we're going to get all these old guys on the cheap and all these waifs and strays and we're going to make it all work and Valdo's not going to stink and all this stuff. Did this really happen?
Well, they used a similar model to last year. Felipe Caicedo, who was on loan from Manchester City, again, he was a player who wanted to prove himself, and he scored some 14, 15, 16 goals, which kept them up. So you could say what they did with Kone, who's a player who's, as you said, just scored the 1 goal in 3 years, terrible in the injuries he suffered with Sevilla, and he was a fantastic talent, actually was fit for a whole year. Again, managed to get a collection of players who have beens, you could say, a collection of players who want to push on, and people like Kone who think who just needed a fresh start, basically. So it's a model they've used over the past few years, and I have a feeling they'll use it again next year. Except everyone like Juan Fran Ballesteros is going to be 1 year older.
Tim, how do you see the season going forward? What are going to be the big moves, from the big clubs? Will Barcelona recover from the loss? I mean, you hear a lot of players now talking very with a lot of confidence, but perhaps almost suspiciously nice about the new man who's come in. What is your take? How is it shaping up?
Well, Real Madrid and Barcelona, everything's very, very good in their world when things are going well. However, both are institutionally very shaky when things don't go well at all, when we're talking about on the presidential level. And there's a lot of trouble at the moment in the background being reported between Sandro Rosé and the new manager Tito Villanova and a falling out perhaps with Pep Guardiola. One of the reasons why he left was he just didn't really get on with Rosé. Laporta, the old president, has said what an absolute mess Rosé has made of the team. He's in local politics at the moment. He said, I won't rule out coming back and maybe taking on Rosé. There's reports that Pep Guardiola didn't back Tito Villanova as his number 2, that it was as big a surprise to him at the moment. This is a newspaper that's reported this, that Barcelona are challenging legally at the moment. There's doubts over whether Piqué will be staying on, whether Alves will be staying on. So it all depends how quickly Barcelona can recover, perhaps over the summer. And this extra 2 weeks of the season for the Copa del Rey is not really helping them. They need to have a quiet spell. So Real Madrid, I think, will maybe make a couple of additions to the squad, perhaps at right back. But Barcelona potentially could be in a little bit of hot water at the moment, and this famous end of a cycle that people write about might well be true.
For Real Madrid, are you surprised that they didn't let Şahin go? Because he had a really good offer, and both he and Real Madrid said no to go to Bayern, which was interesting, I thought.
No, I think Jose Mourinho has been very consistent about his approach to Şahin, saying he's a fantastic player. He's a long-term member of the squad. When Xabi Alonso retires or can't manage a whole 38-game season, he was being injured for a lot of it. He just couldn't get fit, basically. He couldn't get fit and get into the pace of the Primera. And Jose Mourinho has said if he has a full pre-season, he's going to be a very, very important player next season. He's not ready to write him off after, a fantastic player in theory. He just couldn't pick up the pace to get back in time for the Primera. And when he did play, he looked all right, but again, didn't quite have the speed, didn't quite have the precision. He needs a summer where he can get fit and come back. So I think that Real Madrid and Jose Mourinho have done the right thing there.
All right, to compete this Barcelona-Real Madrid, before we get into the team that Andy really wants to talk about, which is Atletico Madrid and, of course, Falcao. Messi and Ronaldo, we've been going through this all year. I think we all know my views and Mina's views on this. But, Andy, did we learn anything new about the endless Messi v Ronaldo debate?
Apart from the fact it's completely bogus. I think.
Why is it bogus? Doesn't one necessarily have to be better than the other?
Well, I don't think so. I think it will always be looked at that way because Messi is someone you can imagine playing well in any era. because of his size, because of his physical characteristics, because of the way he plays. Whereas Cristiano Ronaldo, people don't warm to him because he has this air of arrogance about him. One might say the sense of overdeveloped responsibility that someone like Arjen Robben, as we were talking about before, or maybe Diego going on to Atletico Madrid has, but also because he's a product of such intense physical training. You know, it's all about, you can see what's happened. It's like with the X Factor. People don't like to see the work that's gone in. They just like to see the magic on the night. And with Ronaldo, you can see that a little bit more. You can see he does 3,000 press-ups a day.
He might have done 3,000 press-ups, but if I was a cynic, I might point out that, you know, Leo Messi probably did some training as well, maybe even those 10,000 quality hours, and certainly a lot of HGH when he was a kid. But Raf, do you buy this, or do you have a favorite out of?
I have a huge favourite. For me, it's Messi all the time, simply because I think as a player, I would prefer playing with the guy who makes the complicated stuff look simple, rather making them to make the simpler stuff look complicated. The way that Ronaldo sometimes says, I don't like the showy side of it. I think it's a little bit YouTubey. You know, it's for people who don't necessarily understand football but want to see big stars. As a connoisseur, as a purist, I think Messi's a better choice. And there was an interesting, maybe Tim can tell us more about this, I think there was an interesting article in a Spanish newspaper before the Champions League semi-final between Bayern and Real Madrid, where they listed something like the 100 best Real Madrid players, and Ronaldo was very far down the list. I might not get the whole details right, but I think there was a sense that he's not really seen as a sort of a true great in a purist Real Madrid fashion.
It's true to an extent. There is a certain element of those in the Bernabeu themselves will never really be a huge lover of Ronaldo and take him to their hearts like they do other players like Higuain, for example. They'll certainly appreciate his goals, but it is this arrogance and this fact that he doesn't always carry himself as Real Madrid players should. If you talk about players like Zidane, and he had in the recent past, and even Casillas to an extent. So he's not going to win everyone over, but people can appreciate what he offers to the club. Of course, he was booed in the Bernabeu earlier this season because of his failures against Barcelona. But over the past 6 months, I think people have warmed to him much more in the stadium because he has been key. The hat-trick at Vicente Calderon against Atletico, the winning goal against Barcelona, and a very good Champions League campaign. So they're warming him to him slowly. There was always the reputation of him, unfair perhaps, with the flat track bully, but I think one of the things we have learned this season, he's now eradicated that. He really was a key part of Real Madrid winning this league title. He was the one who was there when the other players didn't perform and were down. He was the one who picked the side up and carried them in many games.
Tim, thank you for that. We're going to have to leave it there because we have a few minutes left in this segment, but we will be talking Falcao, and Andy is so excited. He wants to hog all the time for himself.
All he knew about Atletico Madrid was blind luck once again this season, and it'll be blind luck next season.
That's a bit harsh. But thanks so much, Tim. That's Tim Stannard. You know him as the blogger La Liga Loca. Andy, it's your time. Look, it's Radamel Falcao.
It's a bit of a man crush going on there, is there?
Definitely. I personally like the guy because when Falcao was injured and he was in Buenos Aires, of course, he decided to spend his time going to university to study journalism. He wanted to become one of us, which of course immediately endears him to me. But Andy, does he even enter the Messi Ronaldo conversation, or does he belong in the Mario Gomez, Robin van Persie, Zlatan Ibrahimovic conversation?
I'd put him a little between the two. I think because he's really developed something.
All the Gooners are going to come and get you if you start saying Falcao's better than Van Persie. You know
that's right, we've got locks on the studio, don't worry, it'll be fine. But I think he's really developed his game this season, and it's because he's gone to Atletico, which everyone thought was a ridiculous sideways move. As Tim says, you know, you can expect more of the same with them next season because the club's institutionally wrong, there's no real plan, they're falling into things by having an exceptional new manager bump with Diego Simeone, who employed a defensive strategy with attacking players, so that they hit a happy medium.
How did he get like Diego to go and work?
It's extraordinary. I think it's because he realised he was on his absolute last chance and he really desperately didn't want to go back to Wolfsburg. But going on to Falcao, the thing is, no one really warmed to him at the beginning because Pinto da Costa, the Porto president, was saying, oh, he's just gone there for the money, he's not gone for trophies. And the supporters were saying, well, he's not Kun Agüero. When he needs service, when nothing's happening, he can't drop and make stuff happen. But if you look at everything he's done, not just the goals he's scored, not just the fact he's made the Europa League his own again again, which, you know, it's only the Europa League, but nevertheless it's a European trophy. It weighs 15 kilograms like the Champions League. But if you look in the final, he was able to drop deep and make stuff happen when they were defending a lot of the time, which they were as well. So by people expecting him to be Aguero, he got a little closer to being that.
Well, yeah, I agree with you. I think we're talking about a phenomenally gifted striker, and really a guy who's shown he's a complete striker. Raf, do you buy Andy's point? I'm thinking specifically about the point that because the Europa League weighs as much as the European Cup, it's worth about the same. I have a dishwasher at home that probably weighs far more than your Europa League, Andy. We'll be back in a little while, and we'll be talking some Italy. And guys, Mina will be back. All right, we're back, and this is the part that we've all been waiting for. And if Mina were here, she'd tell you how excited she is, because we're going to be talking about Mina's favorite league, which is Serie A, and most likely, I think it's an open secret by now, Mina's favorite team, Juventus, being crowned champions. And as we wait for Mina to come on, Andy, Antonio Conte, first year in charge, to go the whole season undefeated, and yeah, except for the Coppa Italia final, which they lost, nobody saw it coming, right?
It's absolutely extraordinary. I mean, everyone thought they might come a bit closer. This might be their best shot. They've got rid of some of the dead weights off the wage bill. But nevertheless, I think even without them having any European involvement to give them a clear run at Serie A, everyone assumed the squad would be a little small. But, you know, he's engendered a spirit. He had great tactical adaptability to switch between 3 and 4 at the back. So you really have to applaud him.
Thank you, Andy. And we're lucky. Essentially, about those dead weights. And to be fair, he had to wait until January to get rid of former Bayern striker Luca Toni and Vincenzo Quinta, who once scored against the Germans, and Amauri, who likes to eat bratwurst. But Mina, you're with us. Juventus.
Hey, how are you?
Hello. It's time. It's time to gush. Who are you proudest of on this Juve team?
What was I proudest of?
Who are you proudest of?
Who was I proudest of? The coach, obviously. It was because of him that we got anywhere. But I was rather devastated. By the way, you've so outed me as Juventus fan to everyone. It was some sort of a secret before. Anyway, I just want to mention quickly about yesterday. I was really disappointed with the performance. I think that, although I want to say something, when they're talking about the fact that he was arrogant with the starting lineup, this thing has really irritated me, because I thought that he put down the team that he thought could get something, you know? I mean, he had to face a Vidal and Lichtsteiner that were already sort of injured, and who else best to play against Del Piero than a revived Borriello, who seems to really want to go for it? And I thought it was a good choice. I would have probably also played Borriello if I had the chance. Estigarribia has made a lot of starting appearances for the Coppa Italia, so I don't know why everyone was
Mina,
upset with that. Disappointed. Napoli will have the winners.
Mina, for those who don't know, if you didn't mention it, is that Juventus, of course, lost in the Coppa Italia final to Napoli. Napoli winning their first title in a quarter of a century. But this was supposed to be your opportunity to gush and tell us how great Juve were, not to go out and defend Conte after an uncharacteristic defeat, and one which I think, frankly, few people really care about, because he's already achieved the incredible this season, going 38 games undefeated. We've praised Conte to high heaven. I want to ask you, what are the other keys? What's more? I mean, is it Pirlo? Is it Vidal? Is it the defenders?
It's the midfield. It's obviously in the midfield. It's Pirlo who's dictating everything. It's Claudio Macchi's ability to burst forward and find those spaces in attack. And it's mop up in defense, position himself forward. Most important, runs and runs and runs, and that's really been the key for Juve this season. It's mainly their midfield, and the fact that they've managed to shelter a defense that is really not that different to the one that shipped so many goals last, barring obviously the purchase of Lichtsteiner. It's not such a fabulous team. 3 players that you know Barzagli was playing, Bonucci was there, so is Chiellini, but it's definitely Vidal's influence. His influence, and Pirlo made all the difference. So them alongside Conte are the reason for this.
Mina, do you think this Juventus team can be trendsetters in the sense that they can get other clubs, whether they're big or small, to look at perhaps similar setups tactically, perhaps look away from sort of this obsession that some of the presidents or the big guys have with the big stars, and look a little bit more closer on formations, on tactics, on also personnel that can do specific jobs and can get you work collectively. I mean, they're the ultimate collective champion, and I don't think we have seen that kind of collective approach succeed at this level in Italy for quite a while, in my view.
Well, what I was going to say is that this season you've seen that quite a lot. I mean, you've got, Montpellier, you've got Borussia Dortmund, and now you've got Juventus, and it just goes somewhere. And more often than not, it's gonna succeed. But I don't know whether Juventus is really the only team that I can say. And I know Gav's gonna laugh at me when I say this, but like for example, there are a lot of small teams with the likes of Pioli's Bologna, amongst others, that play very well as a team unit. For one, they may not have the individual talent that Milan has, but I don't think Italy is generally a league, or so many in Serie A are based on just specific talent. It's trying to get the team. If you look at Cesena, they had specific talent. They were relegated. They were,
Mina, I think we've lost you there, Mina. But
to use, but
Mina, we have to say goodbye there. Your line's breaking up. But I think the main message here, Raf, is that you're wrong and Mina's right. And if anything, talking about teams with big stars where they all play like individuals, maybe you should look at Bayern Munich above all. Sorry, that was just a cheap, needless dig. But it is remarkable what Juventus have achieved this year. But Andy, I still get the sense that had Milan found a Guara team that I think is based on big individuals, actually, to support Rafi's point, I still feel that had they managed to keep their guys fit, they would have won the title.
Perhaps. I think the one thing we haven't mentioned about Juventus, which I think is a key thing, is the stadium. Of course, they're going to have the Europa League final there in 2014, and the atmosphere that created.
A lot of people. It's funny because a lot of people don't like the stadium. It's kind of
really
well. It's interesting because, all right, it's so sanitized. It's like being in the Premier League, right? And they pump. They got the DJ and everything. When a lot of people said the new stadiums, they said we should build new stadiums like they do, like the ones in Germany, which are nice and they're cool and they're loud and everything, but you don't feel like you're going to Disneyland with the plastic flags and everything and so on that you get in a lot of like you might get at the Emirates or Stamford Bridge at a lot of the Premier League grounds, and I think the next Italian team to build a stadium, should that ever happen, I think they will be looking more at the German model. There was a sense that it really wasn't so much of a fortress or an intimidating place, more like a big plastic thing.
But is the idea not that it's a complete reaction to the Delle Alpi, which of course had really poor sight lines, was miles away from the pitch, created that disconnect between
better than the Delle Alpi.
But I think also Andy makes a good point. Away from the actual architecture, I think what Juventus have done really well this season is to sort of create the family vibe, as it were.
And that's what people don't like.
No, but
people prefer the way they did it in Germany.
No, but I'm not talking about actual children sitting there. I'm saying they managed to have close links between the club, the players, and the fans. I think they were much more of a unit, and they fostered that kind of togetherness. And the team played in a way that people could buy into, and you didn't have this kind of audience actor kind of relationship that you sometimes get with the bigger clubs. People they want the big names, they want them to perform, and if they don't perform, they get really, really upset. This was more of a we're all in this together kind of thing, and whether it was real or not almost didn't matter, because the perception, I think, already had an impact.
I think that's a great point, and that's one of the things that Juve did exceptionally well this season. It was a season where we can talk about whether Juve are back, but further down the table there were some other interesting moves. Roma, I thought, embarked on this fascinating experiment, bringing back Franco Baldini, the bold move of Luis Enrique, bringing in a whole bunch of players trying to completely radically change.
Always destined to fail or not?
Well, Luis Enrique is gone, but I think he already achieved something incredible, which is that he kept the city on side, and he kept the fan base on side right up until April. As recently as that Fiorentina game when the ultras put up that huge banner a real man in a world of phonies, which I think is so true when it comes to football managers. Adelante Luis. I thought that was special. Now, obviously, it hasn't worked out, but Andy, where do you go next? Do you find another?
That's a good question, isn't it? Because you've started with this project. You really want there to be some sort of continuity, but who can you get to come in? Guardiola? It's really difficult, isn't it?
AVB?
Exactly, because he's just in that situation that he's already failed at a complete reconstruction job. So I find it really unusual that all the jobs he's being linked to are major reconstruction jobs.
Well, what's interesting about Luis Enrique, though, is people saw he's going to be a Guardiola type, and he certainly was, given that he too stressed and walked out at the end of the season, because obviously managing in big bad City is a bit too tough for him. But now we're joined by the Tank, Tancredi Palmieri's with us. That is not his house in the background that you see, although I believe his residence looks a lot like that with all the shirts and scarves. Tank, let's talk about Inter, the other huge messed up basket case in Italian football. An incredible season, 3 different managers. They appointed the wrong one at the beginning. I thought they might have had the right one in Ranieri for a while. Then they said, all right, forget this, let's go with Strama. Where are they left? Are this club going to make the serious decisions it needs to make this summer, which is sell all these old, highly paid veterans and let's do things properly this time? Or is it going to be more of the same?
Buongiorno ragazzi. Well, first of all, I see that you survived to the like of tears that probably Rafa brought over from Munich. Secondly, I wanted to say, well, luckily there is something like Inter for journalists in Italy, for sport journalists. I believe that abroad they all buy all the basket of news that Inter is providing. The question that you were saying, Gabriele, will they take the decision that they delayed for at least a couple of seasons to take? Very difficult, very hard. Taking that decision would mean, first of all, replace people like Cambiasso, like Stankovic, for sure, like Kivu. The new manager, Stramaccioni, the one that is coming from the academy, is a very clever one. I think he could be also a good one. For sure, he's a clever guy. He understood that if he wanted to stay at the Inter, 3 things he had to achieve. Well, the third place to go to Champions League would be the necessary thing, but in case he wouldn't, that was very difficult. 3 things. I would say the good view from the senators of the changing room, 1 result that would give pride to the Inter president, Massimo Moratti, and also being sympathetic to all the journalists. He was extremely welcomed by all the journalists and always nice in the press conference. He achieved the 4-2 in the derby, and Massimo Moratti almost was happy with that, almost was satisfied with that. And always, he played with the senators, actually, and he was always coming out in press conference saying, basically saying that from that point, they had to start from that experience, something like that. So for sure, I think that, it would be very strange if after this policy that also get for him the job, in this summer he would go to the president and say, okay, you know what, period, let's just stop this there, let's bring something new. So honestly, I don't think the decision will take. Still, Inter got some new prospect that, like Coutinho, that is coming back.
Tancredi, stop. No more talking of Coutinho. No more talking of Inter. You've depressed us enough, and you've answered my question. Let's talk Milan here. Zlatan did not win the title this year after 8 consecutive wins. I haven't spoken to him, but if I did, I'm sure he would say, if everybody had stayed healthy this year, Zlatan would have been champion again. Quickly, is he right? If Milan hadn't had all these ridiculous injuries, would Zlatan have been champion again? Because it's all about Zlatan, of course.
Yeah, of course. Well, partially he's right, because of course missing in the most important part of the season, Thiago Silva, and longly along the season, Boateng, that in my opinion is the one that is really changing the energy, the dynamics of the tactics of Allegri, that of course will change a lot. Still, we don't have to forget that few match days to the end, Milan had 4 points, was 4 points ahead Juventus, and having a better calendar. So their destiny was in their hands, and they wasted that. So in spite of all the injuries they would have, if at least they would have at least good tactics or a good managing, my opinion, anyway they would have been champion. So Zlatan is not satisfied because of that medical situation and because of that manager situation. We know already that he had these complaints, that he told his agent to talk with AC Milan just to be reassured about the future. Well, I would like to see what are the next steps of Zlatan after what happened today, because this afternoon Roberto Mancini, Manchester City manager, was not only spotted in Milan, was not only spotted in the center of Milan, was spotted inside the headquarters of AC Milan. For what are my informations, the meeting was not, at least this first one, about Zlatan Ibrahimovic, but was about the possibility of Manchester City overtaking whatever bid Milan would receive for Thiago Silva. Now, if Zlatan Ibrahimovic knows that even Thiago Silva could leave Milan, honestly, for what we all know about the Swedish, I don't think he will just stay there holding the flag of AC Milan.
Tancredi, I think that you may be right. I think the reality is Zlatan Ibrahimovic makes so much money and his stock is where it is that I can't see any team in the world, with a possible exception of Real Madrid, actually making a move for Zlatan. It was, of course, just say it's an old fixation. We got to move on to Napoli, because they didn't finish in the Champions League this year. But ultimately, you have to say the project has been fantastic. They win the Coppa Italia. Ezequiel Lavezzi is going to go. Can De Laurentiis build a team that can challenge for the title now immediately next year, considering that Napoli have money, considering that their finances, unlike Milan and Inter, are actually in very good shape?
Well, there is something to correct in this, Gab. The thing is that, yes, they could have the finance like that. Yes, De Laurentiis got money. But the thing is that he's not spending that. There was this huge research, alternative research, over the last years of the properties in Serie A, of the owners in Serie A. Well, Napoli, in the last year, so President De Laurentiis, is the one that made the most profit from everyone else. More than everyone, more than Udinese, even more than Udinese, had a net something like 25 million euros De Laurentiis. The wages that he is paying to the so-called free tenors or free musketeers in Napoli, that are Lavezzi, Cavani and Hamsik, they are ridiculous for a top club. They are barely 2 million euros that we know at that level it's completely nothing, almost not even 2 million euros. That's because these guys are leaving, not because they don't believe anymore in the Napoli project. The thing is that, yes, Napoli could challenge Milan, Juventus, maybe Inter, but if one of these three will leave, and apparently Lavezzi should be almost for sure the first one to leave, or for Inter or for Paris Saint-Germain, honestly, it is very difficult to bring in someone that is already ready to do what Lavezzi was doing. So if De Laurentiis wants really to challenge, now something that policy has to change. Let's just 10 seconds. Let's remember that if Ashley Cole would have saved that goal over the line, that 4-1 in the first leg, probably wouldn't have had Chelsea winning Champions League this year.
Tancredi, thank you so much for that, and we'll be back with you at some point, no doubt. Thank you, Tancredi.
It's been a pleasure.
Guys, I actually disagree with Tancredi on the Lavezzi point. I mean, and Napoli in general. De Laurentiis has managed to build a team that's profitable already. Lavezzi at some point will become too big for his britches, and you sell him on, and they've shown that they can bring in better players.
Is he going to become worth any more, is the question you've got to ask. And if PSG are in the market, the answer is probably no. So this is probably the ideal time to sell him, especially as they're not going to be going back into the Champions League. Not that they're budgeting for that yet, but nevertheless, this is probably the moment to do it.
Yeah, I mean, Lavezzi, Hamsik and Cavani are sort of bigger than the sum of their parts. I mean, they work so well together. I don't think Lavezzi in itself is such a huge loss. I think you can find players who can do a similar job for less money. Cavani, for me, is the main one. I mean, you know, this kind of guy, you know, where do you find a guy like that?
I think the plan from Napoli is to swap Cavani for Mario Gomez, actually.
Bayern would do
exactly.
that.
One of the other big stories, on a slightly less pleasant side, one big story, obviously, we saw Delio Rossi go and lose his cool with Adam Lage and attack him. We've got the picture here behind him. He's not that kind of coach, was repeated, believe it or not, many times over and over again. On a very
how could he be? How could he be that kind of coach?
Well, exactly. That's basically my point. But one other story in Serie A is just the number of people who've really defined the last decade who are going to be moving on. We're talking Alessandro Del Piero, Antonio Di Natale, Pippo Inzaghi, Marco Di Vaio, Alessandro Nesta, Rino Gattuso, Clarence Seedorf, probably, Ivan Cordoba, definitely, Gianluca Zambrotta, probably, and Kaka Kaladze, who actually wants to go into politics in the Georgian parliament.
But Zanetti will play another decade, surely.
I think it's safe to say, given that Javier Zanetti is he's part bionic man, part Highlander, he's going to be around. But
he doesn't have to worry about his hair moving, does he? So.
No question. But it will feel very, very different, won't it, Andy?
It will, and going back to Milan, like we were talking about before, I think Tank touched on it, that it's going to be a huge challenge for Allegri if he gets to go into next season, because not only he's been really questioned by the way they've fallen short in Europe, and that's why I think Tancredi was saying you can't call Allegri, you can't say Allegri's done a great job yet because they've done nothing in Europe. Now again, there was them nearly going out, them nearly blowing that 4-goal lead against Arsenal. I spoke to Urbi Emanuelson after that game, and he said, "Oh yeah, when we were 3-0 down in the second half, we were really scared. We thought they were going to score again." And you think, this is really coming out of the Milan camp, and now they're losing those experienced players. Where's the character going to come from? It's a huge rebuild.
Plus no Van Bommel.
Plus no Van Bommel. Van Bommel's another one who's leaving. Van Bommel actually crying in his final press conference. I might point out there that they also came very close to beating Barcelona, on incidents with that bizarro penalty. But hey, so maybe it's not all bad. And that was without Thiago Silva.
But I think it's a good point, because I think a team like Milan needs to have the one or two players that are always there. You know they're in control. You know they're sort of the backbone of the side, not just the Zlatans.
Come on, Raf. When they had the same guys who were always there for a year, for 20 years, Maldini, Ambrosini, those guys, you said, look, they're all old. They need to change.
I never said that.
Now they've all. Now they need to. Now they need more of those guys.
No, it's not about the age. I think it's about the structure inside a team.
It's about maintaining the identity of the club.
You need guys that they're the Milan guys. And where are they now?
We have to leave it there, but I think you'll find their names are Nocerino, Boateng, Abbiati, Abate. I could go on and on. Ignore the haters, ignore the negativity, Milan fans. We'll be back. Von Italien nach Deutschland, which is from Italy Serie A to the Bundesliga. Gentlemen, in the last few years, it's become fashionable among us Euro snobs to talk about how fantastic the Bundesliga is because of the goals and the excitement and the great stadiums and the low beer prices, low ticket prices, and also the fact that, Andy, the big juggernaut that's wealthier than everybody else and hoovers up all the best players doesn't actually win.
But still, same champion 2 years in a row now, so it's all
over. Yeah, but
over.
they're the likeable champions, Borussia Dortmund, yeah?
That's right, they certainly are. I guess there's so much in the image of Jurgen Klopp, who seems to be linked with every job going, but why would he want to go anywhere? He's got it so good there. He's got a good group of players, a group of players who can further develop. He's keeping hold of Götze. He's going to get Royce, and that was the thing really about the cup final. It was pre-Royce. It was without Götze, and it's sort of a battle between them and Bayern that could run and run and run.
Raf, as far as I can tell, all the Borussia Dortmund players who matter, and that list doesn't include Lucas Barrios, who of course kind of disappeared this season. I think he only scored one league goal and is now hanging out in China with Marcello Lippi. But all the guys who matter, with the exception of Shinji Kagawa, they got them all to extend their contracts and pretty much pledge their futures to the club. I think that's absolute genius work from the director of football. I'm assuming this was Michael Zorc working with Klopp, who did it. Are you surprised that? Or do these guys have just bad, foolish agents? Have they really bought into Klopp? Do they not want to be millionaires and increase their wages?
No, I mean, there's three things happening. One, Zorc is doing a fantastic job, and together with Klopp, they're selling this project, and they keep reselling this project. And of course, the players see that this is actually this is happening. You know, we've won the championship, now we've won a double. You know, who knows what we'll do next year. The second thing is, of course, that they spend the money that's coming in sort of behind the scenes. It's an inward investment going on, invisible kind of strengthening of the squad by upping the wages, keeping everyone happy. The third thing is, and here is where it gets a little bit more complicated, the German players buy into this, but not all of the foreigners do. And the summer is not over. I mean, somebody like
Lewandowski could be getting a little itchy.
Somebody like Lewandowski has been really flirting with a lot of people. His agent has been saying, yeah, you know, Man United is quite interesting, and maybe even Bayern might be a club for us. He's only got 1 year left. You know, Piszczek, if he has a fantastic Euros, and he could really be one of the outstanding right backs of the competition, he'll have more suitors. So it's not over yet. So far, so good. But they still face, you know, another, 2.5 months until the end of August before they're really safe?
Yeah.
Well, there you go. We're joined by James Thorogood from Bundesliga.com. And James, Rafi saying that, hey, Borussia Dortmund, they're not quite out of the woods yet. A bit of Schadenfreude, perhaps, also sprach das Bayern-Fan. But I want to ask you, though, Borussia Dortmund's 81 points this season, which is a new record. We've seen a league record in Spain. We've seen a new league record in the Bundesliga. Earlier, Raf was telling us how there wasn't this huge gap in the Bundesliga that was in Spain, and yet still, Borussia Dortmund run away with it. In your opinion, is there a huge gap, or is it just the case again that Borussia were just so much better and they really had to work for those 81 points?
I mean, they certainly had to work for them. But for me, the clear difference between Dortmund and Bayern was that in the big match between the two teams, Dortmund were the team that showed up both times. Bayern really struggled, and they had their number tactically, Dortmund. And so for me, that really was what made the difference this season. Is there a gap between the quality of both teams? Not really. And if Bayern strengthen in the summer, they are more than capable of making a title push next season and really testing Dortmund as to whether they are the new power.
James, I'm sorry, but I have to cut in there. I completely disagree with your analysis, because the real gap was not apparent in those two games. Those were 2-1-0 games. It could have easily been 0-0 games, 1-1 games, 2-1 games. The gap was in the games that Dortmund won against the lesser teams, where Dortmund's collective commitment, their attitude and their tactics was superior than Bayern's individualistic approach.
Yeah.
They were the better team. They weren't necessarily better in the head-to-head games, although the results would bear out your analysis. And that's where Bayern's biggest problem is, and that's why they're so puzzled and not sure how to take this Dortmund complex on, because they understand here's a side that doesn't quite have the same quality of players, but they're already much better than us as a team on a day-to-day basis.
Maybe just have a better manager. James, what do you say?
Absolutely, that's the point.
I completely agree with you. And the fact is, you said it before, Raf, Dortmund are a well-oiled team. And I agree with you that the difference really was made in the smaller matches. But in the matches between Bayern and Dortmund, I just thought Dortmund had Bayern's number tactically. And I thought that really, I think, maybe played with the mind and the mental strength of Bayern Munich throughout the season. And we saw that in the second head-to-head game, that Bayern really, concentration levels-wise, dropped every now and again. And that, for me, was the difference, that Dortmund, despite what happened off the field, despite all the problems with the players they let go last summer and all of that, they came through, they came out stronger. Whereas Bayern, anything that happened off the field just seemed to unnerve them that little bit. And Dortmund, for me, really held their nerve throughout the season, constantly shifted the pressure on Bayern. And that, for me, swung it in Dortmund's favour this year.
And here's the interesting question. Can they do it and still play in Europe after the winter break, unlike the first two seasons before, which has clearly helped their style, because the physical style we saw in the beginning of both seasons couldn't quite deal with the Wednesday, Saturday, Tuesday rhythm. And you know that will be the big task for them, because it won't be just good enough to be good in the league. Now everyone expects them to bring that kind of performance and those results onto the European stage.
Well, sorry, James, we have to move it on from Borussia Dortmund to another Borussia, because obviously Borussia Dortmund, lots of challenges and question marks ahead for them. But we really want to get you on Borussia Mönchengladbach, because this season, some great football. Lucien Favre, maybe going back to some of the form he showed at some time in his early stages at Hertha Berlin. But now Marco Reus is gone. Hermann could turn into a Reus. what do you expect from him next season? And will this team be plundered further in the summer?
I certainly think they'll be investing money over the summer in replacing the big players they're losing in Dante Neustädter and Royce. Whether they'll be able to find really true replacements for them is a great question. Granit Xhaka has obviously already come in, and he is a great signing from FC Basel. For me, I'm not so sure Gladbach can reach the same heights as they did this season. I think they'll still be in the top half of the table and certainly pushing for a European place. Top four, I'm not so sure. I think there are some other teams that if they strengthen over the summer and can invest in their squads, I'm thinking of a Stuttgart, a Wolfsburg, teams like that could potentially make a top four push. And for me, Gladbach will drop off a little bit. But the fact is, as long as they can hold on to Lucien Favre, they've got a great manager in him. He's been the manager of the season in many people's eyes. Gladbach, obviously, the surprise of the season. They are playing some great football. And I think that will still continue next season.
And the interesting thing about him is the next season will almost be seen as a kind of audition for the Bayern job. Because if he can do the same thing or even get anywhere near maybe the last 16 in the Champions League or reaching Europe again with this team, rebuilding, then I think there is only one logical candidate after Heinke's departure.
Don't you love the imperialism coming out of Munich? It's fantastic. James, got to get you on a guy who I wasn't his biggest fan as a player, but he's proven me wrong again. Klaas-Jan Huntelaar banged in a lot of goals this year. Settle something for me. Is he the kind of guy who needs a lot of service to score his goals, a bit like perhaps Mario Gomez? Or is he a legitimately great center forward, maybe not as much of an all-rounder as his countryman Robin van Persie, but more in that mold?
I think it's a difficult one. Yeah, you can draw the parallels with Gomez, but I think he's slightly less dependent on service than Gomez is. I think he can create for himself, and unlike Gomez, you don't often see Gomez shoot from outside the box. Klaas-Jan Huntelaar, every now and again, if he's got his back to goal and needs to turn and take the shot, he's willing to do that as well. And he's certainly both of them have been in fantastic form. I would say Huntelaar is slightly less dependent on the service, though. When you've got Robin and Ribéry either side of you, it's for Gomez, it's almost difficult not just to rely on those two guys. Whereas Klaas-Jan Huntelaar with Schalke has to create more for himself every now and again. And we saw in big games, especially in the Europa League, he really did make the goals for himself. And that is what set him apart from Mario Gomez this season. And so I think he was definitely the deserved winner of the top goal scorer award.
James Thurgood from Bundesliga.com, thanks so much for joining us. And we're going to be moving on and do a bit of Holland and a bit of Portuguese next. But stay tuned. And we're back. We're going to be talking some Portugal and some Eredivisie. Still with me, Andy Brassell, and of course, Raphael Honigstein. Let's start with Portugal, and in a minute we're going to get Tom Kundert from Portugal.net. But Andy, I have a question here, okay? So, riddle me this. Andre Villas-Boas leaves Porto, and they still win the title. His old club, Académica, which couldn't win anything with him, go and win the league sort of 12 months after, or I guess, sorry, to win the cup, actually, some 2 years after he leaves. And, of course, he gets kicked out of Chelsea, and Chelsea win the Champions League and the FA Cup. Is there some broader message there where it's good to have, oh, and I might add, when he was at Inter Milan, of course, and then he leaves and Inter win the Champions League. So should somebody then just sign Villas-Boas even just for a few months and then send him on his way?
It's obviously Roma's plan. It has nothing to do with continuity. Perhaps it'll even work for Liverpool. But I think if you look at what's happened with Porto this season, it's about more than just the results. They've a stronger squad than won the league and the Europa League under Villas-Boas, but they've not really played with any certainty. They've not exuded the same sort of certainty, and Benfica really, really let it slip. So, I mean, it's really a thought of what might happen with Barcelona, because, of course, Vitor Pereira, who is the head coach of Porto now, he's very much the Villanova figure, the ideas man, but he never had the same authority, the same rhetoric, the same ability to inspire, and Porto nearly suffered for it.
Let's get Tom's take on it. Tom, you heard what what Andy said there. Is that are you on board with that? And also, what does it say about Portugal, though, that we had, for much of the season, we had such a tight three-way race with Benfica, of course, who perhaps underachieved, and also Braga, who once again punched well above their weight.
Yeah. Well, I think that's possibly the story of the season, really. Braga kind of firmly established themselves as the fourth top club in Portugal, who really are in the running for the title. But I'd agree with Andy there. I mean, Porto, you look at their squad at the start of the season and you think really they're going to run away with it. And if they'd played up to their potential, they should have really, because Benfica never really got it together. They had a good run in the middle of the season, but let it slip very badly at the end. I'd say they're probably at about the same level as last season. But Porto, although they won the league, ended up winning it with a 6-point gap. There's no doubt about it. They weren't in the same class as the Porto of last season.
What's the Braga secret to go and be able to do this time and again? Is it all down to the president, whose name escapes me, but I'm sure you'll remind me?
Yeah, Antonio Salvador. Yeah,
yes.
I think that's about it. Yeah, I mean, since he's taken over,
what does he do that makes this possible?
Picks the right transfer targets, picks the right coaches. Although he's not averse to sacking them if they're not to his liking. People tend to forget in the last 7 or 8 years they've had about 5 or 6 coaches, and most of them have been very successful. There've also been 1 or 2 who haven't lasted very long there. He just seems to have a good football brain. He's got an eye for a bargain. He really picks up the best of kind of, you could say, Porto rejects or Benfica rejects. Maybe that's a bit harsh saying rejects. Players who haven't really quite come off at those clubs. He picks them up. He also picks up the odd bargain from Brazil. And it's kind of also a little bit of a cycle of success, because now a very talented player in Portugal who hasn't got the chance maybe of going to the big three, they want to go to Braga, and Braga is on the top of their list because they know they're going to get European football. They know they're going to be in contention for titles, and so it's kind of a question of success, building success.
The other sort of traditional member of Portugal's big three, Sporting, had I think another disappointment season. It's fair to say, despite the reemergence of one Rick van Wolfswinkel. But is this team? Can they ever get it right? What do they need to do? And at least unlike the other two, at least they play some Portuguese players once in a while. It should be said.
Well, they used to, and then they went and bought 18 players last summer. Not one of them was Portuguese. So there was a change in strategy from that point of view. But it was interesting because as the season went on, some of them were successful, like you mentioned, Wolfswinkel there, also Stein Schaars, very good buy. Capel, also he impressed on occasion. But throughout the season, a lot of the Portuguese players kind of re-emerged, and at the end of the season, there was 4 or 5 playing regularly. And also they swapped their manager in mid-season, got rid of Domingos Paciencia, brought in Sao Pinto, who's like a sporting icon, and he seems to be a bit more willing to give Portuguese players a chance. And so, but I think even that kind of shows you what the problem is at Sporting. They've got no defined strategy, and their boardroom is just pretty much in complete chaos for as long as I can remember. Absolutely no continuity. And it seemed like last season with this new president and a big injection of capital and buying big, which Sporting haven't done for years, it seemed like they were really kind of making a statement. They want to get to Porto and Benfica's level, but all went a bit wrong, all went a bit pear-shaped. And now, after yesterday's result especially, what had looked at times like a promising season ends up as another pretty disastrous one.
Tom Cundred, thank you so much. We're going to have to leave it there, but do keep up with Tom. You can read him at portugal.net. Anyway, moving on to Holland in a minute, but just one last thing. Holland produce and export a tremendous amount of footballers, but if you go in the Dutch league, they have a lot of homegrown players. There are a lot of Dutch players. Portugal, bizarrely, produce an industrial quantity of players, send them all abroad, and replace them all with foreign players. It seems somewhat counterintuitive.
Well, I think it's something to do with a close historical and trade relationship with Brazil, because third-party ownership is probably the biggest in Europe in Portugal, and of course that's a very Brazilian thing as well. And everyone looks at Porto to what to do, and that's the thing that they've done. They've gone and plundered the South American market, and if you go every summer and buy 8-10 South American players, maybe 5 or 6 of them don't make it, 1 or 2 will give you good value, and 1 you'll be able to build into an Anderson and sell on and cover your costs for the next couple of years.
Or a Falcao, indeed.
For example.
Moving on to Holland. This is Ajax's second consecutive title. Frank de Boer in charge. Raf, I'm kind of shocked by this when you look at what he's had to overcome. Now, once again, he's had injuries to his strikers this season. Of course, in the summer, he lost Martin Stecklenburg. He's had this bizarre row between Van Gaal and Johan Cruyff. I certainly didn't expect this to him. So Frank de Boer, and I said, I felt like he's a kind of a placeholder, but he certainly proved me wrong. Did he prove you wrong as well?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, it was a very, very difficult setup, and you could have perhaps expected 1 or 2 of the big boys to come in and use that weakness to their advantage. But I think overall, for me, they're still the best functioning squad. And, this is only the second time that they've managed to win consecutive titles since the golden generation stopped playing. That's how long it's been taking to almost get back to the Ajax of old. But I think
it's actually the 3rd title since the golden generation.
Yeah, but it's not a consecutive one. They've only done it once.
I think it's also the 3rd title, if you think about
it.
Oh,
in total, yeah, absolutely. And that is really, I think, for me, almost like a, the Empire Strikes Back scenario, because, you had a couple of seasons now where the provinces sort of came to the fore, and you've had some really unusual teams and smallish teams winning titles, the Twentes, the Alkmaars, etc. But now Ajax, I think, have got their stuff together, despite all the boardroom troubles. I think they've got a fantastic coaching staff. You look at all the names who are involved there. You don't like them?
Oh, well, I'm just wondering, we talk about...
You don't like Bergkamp?
What? I mean, I've never been coached by Dennis Bergkamp.
Yeah, I'm sure it can't. I'm sure it can't hurt. I'm sure it can't hurt. But again, we talked about what Juventus have done. We talked about a little bit what Dortmund are doing, and of course, Ajax have a very different style of football. But I think, as a whole, as a club, they've been able to have the same thing. There's been lots of issues for lots of clubs. PSV in turmoil. Twente had to change manager. Ajax had stability. And sometimes, stability comes together with quality. That is just that 10% more. That's enough to win a title. Yes.
Is it stability when they've had? Because actually, what's amazed me is the number of injuries they've had.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
But the uncertainty of the boardroom, having to play De Jong up front.
You're right.
Trying and finishing. Having Van der Wiel basically make it clear that he's leaving for Tongan all season long.
But that's exactly my point. I would suggest to you that these things didn't matter because the basic setup was so strong that it doesn't matter what happens if Van Gaal is fighting with Cruyff or if Van der Wiel wants to go, because the team worked every time as a unit, and they were able to replace and they were able to deal with these injuries because the basic setup was much better than anyone else.
Did you buy this about the basic setup? Because I look at some of these, except for the defense, I see a bunch of very ordinary players. Maybe Anita, Eriksson, of course, although he's very talented, but not exactly the finished article yet, nor really athletic.
Well, I think they've
credit
stumbled.
Needs to go to De Boer.
They've really stumbled on the correct solution with De Boer. Like I suppose, like Chelsea did with Mourinho in an entirely different way back when. But I think the thing is with De Boer, he's someone who really embodies the philosophy of Ajax, and that's really important. When you consider there's this dialogue in the Netherlands at the moment that the national team's moving away from that with Van Marwijk, who's more of a pragmatist who goes with 2 defensive midfielders. But if we're talking about coaches, we also have to reevaluate Ronald Koeman, because he was someone who was seen as a total failure after what happened at Valencia, then at AZ. He wasn't particularly liked at Benfica as well, and they were losing 18 months ago. They were losing 10-0 to PSV. Now they've finished above them in the Champions League, having sold PSV their best player or their best young player in Giorgio Wijnaldum. It's an extraordinary story.
Ajax, of course, finishing the season with 14 consecutive victories, which I find absolutely mind-blowing. Can they continue it next season, given that they're likely to lose, certainly, I think, Van der Wiel and Vertonghen. But there'll be more to come. But we're going to be back in a little while where we'll be talking some Euro 2012. Stay with us. We're back. Thanks for sticking with us. It's the final segment of our show where, after having looked back, we'll be doing some looking forward. Gentlemen, European Championships, Poland and Ukraine this summer. Spain have won 2 in a row. Anybody want to stick their neck out and say they're going to make it 3, thereby making history?
No. I'll stick my neck out and say the Germans will win it.
I'm not convinced by the Germans. I think there's a reliance on a couple of key experienced players. And I think if you go back to the friendly, and admittedly it is only a friendly, at the end of February between Germany and France, they struggled a bit without Schweinsteiger and Lahm. And you wonder how much of it, because they've got this prodigious production line that everyone's talking about so much at the moment, how many of those players are actually tested at the top level.
Andy, but that was the friendly that nobody wanted to play, and I would suggest that the French team with Blanc were under more pressure to come with a good performance rather than the Germans who've just come off the back of a win against Brazil and Holland, and there was a sense that, we are fine. It doesn't really matter. We know what we're doing. Whereas I think for France, still, since Blanc has taken over, for me, it's almost like every game is a kind of a verdict, a kind of an
exercise improving the image that they lost in 2010. And they had a point to prove, whereas Germany didn't. I don't think you can really read that much into this game. And can you read that much into friendlies full stop, I suppose? Because of course, when France come to the Euros, everyone's talking about this 18-match unbeaten run. In a lot of those games, they've really struggled. For example, the ones that have counted, like the one against Bosnia at the Stade de France, they managed to almost bomb their own way out of qualification. Before the playoff, when they could have ended up in it.
Yeah, but France are an interesting team because you look at the players and you think, player by player, why shouldn't they win the Euros?
Well, who has a better squad than France?
Yeah, well, exactly. But as a team,
seriously,
as a team, they don't work.
Right. Well, spraying verdicts, but who has a more talented squad than France at the Euros? I was thinking about this, and I'd say Spain, but top to bottom, I don't know that anybody else does.
Yeah, it's all about how they perform under pressure. And I think the most important thing about the Euro is because it's such a short tournament, it's got to be about the current nick you're in. There's not a lot of time to get form together. And I think that central defensive partnership that they've relied on so heavy, that Laurent Blanc has hung so much on between Mexes and Rami, neither of those are in good nick at the moment. And I think that's a big problem for them.
Now, a lot of people are on the Dutch bandwagon. I'm not, because I don't like little teeny tiny center halves, and also I think people like Robin and Van Persie. I don't want to jinx anybody, but they're about due a breakdown once again. But am I wrong in thinking that I think Holland are our third favorites with the bookies, and to me that's a sell all the way. Am I wrong on that, Raf?
Well, I think there's two things to consider. A, it's the group, which is a big problem. I think not just for Holland but also for Germany, because we've seen it in the past. You get out of this group, if you make it alive, you carry injuries, you carry suspensions, and in that kind of game, in that kind of tournament, that more than often than not is not a good thing to have a really tough group. And of course they did it exactly that way in 2008, but then couldn't quite get themselves together in the knockout game against Russia. And I think a similar thing could happen again. They have the toughest group. Yes, they might go through, but you look at the back four, it's not really inspiring at all. And I think there is still this disconnect between this wonderful attacking array of talent that they have and the very ordinary guys at the back. And in the middle, you've got these controllers, as they call them. They're more sort of less just holding midfielders, trying to get the ball as quickly as possible to the front guys again. And they still look a little bit like the broken team that we saw at the World Cup. So I don't think they're big favourites for me this time.
Yeah, you down on Holland as well?
Well, I think Raf's got a really good point in that group is going to take a lot out of you physically, because Denmark are hard to break down. They're very good in qualifying as well. Portugal always have trouble with them. And, Portugal have really improved since Paulo Bento has taken over from the really miserable football they were playing under Carlos Queiroz as well. So whoever comes out of that, the two teams that come out of that group are going to be at a disadvantage.
Well, let's talk Portugal for a minute. Obviously, on paper, they're not favoured to come out of the group, but we seem to have this obsession with saying that Ronaldo and Messi can't be among the greatest ever because they haven't won major competitions. I'm wondering, is this the one where Portugal make it to the quarterfinals and then that guy just takes over?
Well, it might be Ronaldo's moment, because talking of how things have improved under Paulo Bento, he scored 2 goals in 2 years under Queiroz. One was against North Korea and the other was a penalty in a friendly against Finland.
So he's due.
Where he scored 7 in 9 under Bento. And he looks happier, he feels the most important player in the team, and rather than obsessing about having to get this proper central striker that they don't produce because of this self-perpetuating myth of wingers and wingers and wingers coming out of the sporting academy, they thought, fair enough, we haven't got a number 9, it's all about Ronaldo, he wants to be on the left, we'll put him there and stick Elder Postiga in the middle, even though no one rates him.
Oh, I'm also wondering whether somebody like Nani, who I think is is a fantastic player, and maybe this year's slowed by injuries, if he could be the kind of guy who's just kind of getting back and peaking at the right time. You guys both gave short shrift to Spain.
No, I don't give short shrift to Spain. They're still, for me, the second favourites. I just think the Germans have a little bit more this time.
What's wrong with Spain? Try to answer the question without mentioning Germany.
There is not much wrong with Spain. I just think that it'll be a lot harder for these guys to maintain the level. I think this is very vague and a very sort of banal trivial point, but it is actually, I think, very good one still, because it's hard. It's hard when you're already the world champions. It's hard you're already European champions. Nothing else is good enough. And you come off the back of a horrendously difficult season for all these big guys, because they were killing each other in the league. One on the Barcelona side, one on the Real Madrid side. And I just don't think they'll have quite the same intensity, that hunger that you saw. You could argue that the World Cup winning Spain side were already the lesser relatives to the Euro 2008 side. And I don't think you see a progression, a trajectory of a team getting stronger and stronger. I see a team that have peaked in 2008 and getting weaker at a level that's still obviously high above everyone else, but they're going slightly down. Germans are still going slightly up. I just think that they might meet at a point where the Germans might just have a little bit more.
I knew he was going to go back to Germany. Andy, what concerns me a bit perhaps about Spain is actually this time around really is central defence, with
definitely
Puyol out, Piqué having a poor season, Javi Martinez. It looks like he might start there, but you're talking about a guy who's very young, who's a holding midfielder out of position at the back, or indeed Sergio Ramos in central defence, which also
is an accident waiting to happen.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Mourinho would disagree with you, but it did work out quite well for him.
Look, the strikers apart from Llorente don't look that exciting either. I mean,
there has to be a question over whether Torres will be in the squad.
Soldado doesn't excite you? If he goes?
No, he doesn't excite
Pedro
me.
doesn't go?
No.
No, so you're more excited by, of course, Podolski, Mike Hanke, and Stefan Kiesling. But sorry, that was a cheap shot. Let's not go there. Mike Hanke? No.
Was nominated.
Didn't make it this time around. So sorry for him. Let's look at some of the other teams. You haven't mentioned we've mentioned Italy yet, where Cesare Prandelli has gone in a completely opposite direction. In the past, I'm a bit wary because I feel like it was like, oh, we're going to play like Barcelona and pass the ball around, do the tiki-taka, and like he's kind of doing it just as it's sort of going out of fashion, although by the same token, it is playing to Italy's strengths perhaps, because they're outstanding midfielders, whereas perhaps in the past there were outstanding strikers. Yeah,
and of course you get the impression that Prandelli's got a bit more liberty to experiment. There's a lot more goodwill at home behind him. So, there's the feeling that they're building something, that he's trying to revolutionise something. And I don't think people are going to jump on his back if they encounter a few difficulties at the Euro. And I think that's a very, very open group as well. We talked about the difficulties that Spain might have. Croatia have got a lot of quality in their squad, and the fact that it's Slaven Bilic's last hurrah as well. And, who knows what happens when Italy play Ireland. Trapattoni's Italy.
It's a tough game for Italy, I think, that.
How come? Can you elaborate on that? Or?
I just think you have this whole psychology with Trap being there, and he'll be set up the team that will be against Italy rather than almost for the Irish, and I think he does that very well. And I still worry about, I mean, you said Italy have outstanding midfielders, and I agree with you, but I still always worry, and I think this has been a theme over the last maybe 15 years, about the creative spark. Where does it really come from? You have this wonderful quality in Pirlo, but he's very, very deep, and I think breaking down teams will be difficult for you.
It's your opinion. You're entitled to it. I, for one, am totally on board with Cesare Prandelli, and it's about time that Italy go back and win another major championship, because it's been all of 6 years on this one. My guests today, Andy Brassell, Raphael Honigstein. We took you all over Europe with us. We did our best to sum up what's been, in my opinion, another fantastic season from Real Madrid winning La Liga, setting a new record. Borussia Dortmund. We just kind of get a reminder once again. Montpellier in France, of course, Lilliputian team. Juventus going undefeated the season long. I think we get reminded once again how privileged we are to be able to talk to you guys about this wonderful sport we call football. We'll be back hopefully next season. Take care.
They're the plucky underdog, even if it is an extraordinary story in budgetary terms. The quality really is there. They completed more dribbles than any other team in the league. They had more shots. They were the top scorers. So this all means something. You know, they haven't gone to tough it out.
You're going all statistical on there, and of course, I think the obvious question going forward is certainly two of the most talked about stars that they had, certainly not the only ones, Olivier Giroud and Yunus Belhanda. They're not going to be there next season, or will they stick around for Champions League football, a la Eden Hazard at Lille?
They could. Belhanda has said it would make no sense really for this to be the club that I came through the youth system with, and you know me not play Champions League football for them. Giroud's perhaps a different story. We'll have to see about that, because there are.
He's a bit older. He's from Grenoble.
Yeah, that's right. He was a bit of a late developer. But Belhanda's only just moved really to that orthodox number 10 position. He was a defensive midfielder before that. He knows he's still learning the game, and he knows Girard, the coach, is the man who can teach him that, because of course he was with the French national team before as assistant, then he was under 21s coach. He is a great guy to bring young players through.
A lot of people thought that Lille, you know, it's sort of the curse of French football. You know, Lille, they do well, they win the title, and then boom, they lose Yohan Cabaye, they lose Gervinho, they lose Moussa Sow, they lose Adil Rami, and yet they still had another very strong year in finishing third, and you know, at times really pushing Paris Saint-Germain and Montpellier. Is this a testament to Rudy Garcia, or is it a well-run club? Or is it Joe Cole?
Well, I think it's both of those first two,
okay.
Certainly. I think the third one, actually, Joe Cole had a very good first 2/3 of the season, but what his impact really did, again, is not something entirely on the playing side. He raised the aspirations of the squad, and I think the relationship that he created with Eden Hazard was an extraordinary one. You know, he increased his expectations, and really, you could say Lille were a lot weaker in a lot of ways. Physically, they were a bit short. They didn't close.
I can manage that transition very well. I think he's almost a perfect manager. It's not a project in the sense of building everything from the grassroots level, but actually the other way around, you know, sort of going from the top down. And I think that's what he's very good at from his experience at Milan and at Chelsea. And I think he will get it right eventually if they allow him to strengthen again. And the indications are that he will be. So I think that you have to, for me, unless they get it horribly wrong in the transfer market, for me, they're already now the huge favourites to win the next year.
Andy, one of the keys that can often happen, one of the things that often happen, we've seen it with Manchester City, we've seen it with other clubs, is that there was a whole bunch of relatively high-priced players there before, in Erdink and Nene and whatever else. They brought in more. Now they're going to bring in still more guys. You got they could find themselves in a situation where they're stuck with all these players who make too much money that they can't loan them out to other teams and they can't sell them. Can Leonardo navigate that? I mean, what do you do with like a Diego Lugano at this stage? Are you really going to say, "Ooh, Lugano and Alex are my center halves"? No, you presume that they'll fit a Sacco in there, whatever. It's going to be difficult, right?
Yeah, and he's been shown a certain degree of impatience, Lugano. I think that's a very good example of what's wrong. They've still got plenty of chaff that they can get rid of. But what I think is the problem for them is because the French league is a profile lower than the Premier League, Spain, Germany. They've got to really...
And Italy.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
They've really got to do something quite drastic to convince players that they've got to come in. Like the timing of Ancelotti coming in was all wrong. They should have kept Combarare towards the end of the season, toughed it out, even if they weren't playing great football. But they need to have great players straight away and big names straight away if they're going to convince other big names to come and be taken seriously.
Yeah, I expect Ancelotti would agree with you that he would have much rather come in at the end of the season. That wraps up France, but don't worry, we've got so much to get through. We've got we've got a bit of the old Italy and the old Bundesliga coming up in a bit. But first, España. Stay with us. We're back with one of the most closely fought leagues in Europe. Yes, it's Le Championnat in France. And Andy, it's a ridiculous story, Montpellier winning the title. One thing I want to get from you is, and we were talking about this before, is what would some equivalents to Montpellier be in other leagues? You know, when we came up with, maybe we'd be talking perhaps an Udinese or a Granada, or something of that ilk. But what I want to get from you is, could this only have happened in France in terms of the top European leagues? A team like that winning the title?
I think it could maybe have only happened this season in France even. I think you've got a point where the PSG project hasn't really taken hold. They have got a lot of good players, of course, but they're very, very bitty this season. And I think it would have been the worst slight on the French game if PSG had somehow managed to eke out that title, because it would have been through moments of individual quality rather than anything else. Lille went to the Parc des Princes when it was full up and they played PSG off the pitch. Montpellier did the same. They had 60-65% possession. But, it is an incredible achievement because this is a team that's got the 14th biggest budget out of 20 in Ligue 1. If you look at Lyon, for example, who are underachieving, who finished 4th this season and won the Cup, they've got a budget that's 8 times the size of Montpellier. So it's absolutely extraordinary. But it's money in the bank from what they've done in bringing through youth players. And of course this is an important thing for lots of French clubs, of course. Even Rennes, Lyon, they bring through a lot of players. But the fact they've managed to do that because when they were taking root in the French First Division a couple of years ago, they wanted to mix those youth products with a couple of experienced players who've been around the block. They've kept that, and those players, even if they're not in the team anymore, lose out some games they should have done. They conceded a lot of points in the last 5 minutes, whereas Montpellier won a lot of points in the last 5 minutes. But Hazard really carried the team for the last 3 months of the season. He scored 20 goals, he created another 15, he became that central figure, and he expected things to be expected of him.
We surely don't expect Hazard to be back next season.
No, he won't be.
What worries me a little bit is, why is he going out there playing silly buggers? First he says, I'll be playing at Manchester next season, but not saying if it's going to be the blue half or the red half. Then at some point he said, no, I'll be playing in blue. And then now this last thing, this interest from Chelsea flatters me. Is this in line with his personality? Because I thought he was a pretty solid guy. Instead, he seems like he's got a loopy.
This is a mark of extraordinary self-confidence, I think. He's just incredibly frank. I think the one deviation to that really is this change at the last minute. That he said he would announce where he was going, consistent with what he'd said all along, after the last game of the season. I think the fact that he has expected the sort of wages that someone who's the finished article would get, whereas potential suitors want to pay him the wages of someone who's a good player who could become a great player. and Chelsea have come out of left field and maybe be prepared to pay him what he really wants to get. I think that is the subtext that's lingering in the background.
Now, Paris Saint-Germain, of course, so much hype with Qataris coming in. They spent a tremendous amount of money. Raf, they changed their manager in mid-season in what was really probably not a very well-constructed team. They got in a warrior of the light like Carlo Ancelotti, but ultimately they stumbled at the end. Are they going to be back stronger next season?
Yeah, I mean, there is no suggestion that they shouldn't be. We've seen it many times before, you know, a team that sort of gets pumped up and is almost like on steroids from one season to the next. It doesn't automatically then win the title straight away. It took Chelsea a year, it took Man City a couple of years, and I think PSG would have to fall in that similar category. I think in Ancelotti they have a guy.
Or the likes of Geoffroy Denis, Cyril Jeanchamp, they're around the squad, and the younger players have had the confidence to take it on, the likes of Giroud and Belhanda, and take their central role.
Raf, that's all fine and good, but bottom line is last night, were it not for a man named John Utaka, he a former Portsmouth, and I think went to Saudi Arabia, he went all around the world. Were it not for his 2 goals, we'd be talking about Paris Saint-Germain and Carlo Ancelotti right now.
Yeah.
Does it say something that this was also the season that, you know, or is it Montpellier being good, or is it clubs like Lyon, like Marseille, like Bordeaux? Because it's easy to pick on Paris Saint-Germain, but at least they came within range of Montpellier. These other clubs stunk it up all season long, and they also have huge budgets relative to Montpellier.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, all the giants, the big boys, just didn't turn up, and it was still a surprise that one of the smallest actually took advantage, rather than sort of a perhaps slightly more mid-table team. I mean, this is a team, as you know, that were in the 2nd division 3 years ago. So I'm struggling to come up with any analogy that would actually fit. I mean, we might have to say something like Blackpool. I don't know. It's just bizarre.
Kaiserslautern did something like that in Germany, I think, many years ago, right?
It's true, but they were a genuine title-winning side, which had a very off year, went down, then went up again with the same players and won it. So even that was a bit of a strange story. But I mean, it's just amazing because you can see that the sort of the thing about football that you saw in a Champions League final over one game can actually, on very few occasions, be replicated over the whole season. That the underdog really has its day, but that kind of league in France is enough to sort of keep you interested for another 10, 20 years, because it's such an amazing story that can only happen, I think, as far as professional sports is concerned, in football. You cannot imagine basketball or you know, American football, this kind of stuff, the differences being level to the extent that a team like Montpellier can win. That's amazing.
But there's quality there too. I mean, you can't just say